Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abby Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's show, I want to talk about the concept of putting ourselves out there for the sake of friendship. And I'm going to give you a very specific example and kind of do a twofer. Both talk about what it's like to invest in godly friendships and kind of what that could entail. And I do have an entire chapter on this coming out in my new book in September 2023 called Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad, because I hear all of the time that mom friendships are hard. It's hard to find kindred spirits. It's hard to find like-minded folks. It's hard to find the time to invest. It's hard to find similar parenting styles so you don't feel like you're always kind of worrying about whether their kids and their parenting styles are going to have an influence on you, which, is a reasonable consideration, but sometimes is not necessarily a bad thing depending on the influence that it might have. So there's all these factors involved and all of these things that make it feel like it can be really complicated to find good mom friends and kind of how to go about that. And then the second part, the two-pronged approach, other bird that I'm going to knock out, so to speak, is to talk about this thing that I started a year and a half ago called Grace Girls. And it is a homeschool girls group, but I don't think it has to be specifically unique to homeschoolers. And it's something that the Lord just really put on my heart to do. And I'll talk about how that came about here in just a little bit. Today's episode is probably going to be a little bit shorter because I'm actually on a time crunch today as my little boys sleep and I have to go do some cleaning at our homeschool co-op. So I'm going to talk as fast as I can, include as much detail as I can, and then I'll be off. This episode, by the way, dovetails nicely with the episode that I did on stages of life, because I really feel like this Grace Girls group that I've been able to start is because I really feel like the stage of life that I'm in, the maturity level that the Lord has brought me to, the time management skills that He has grown in me, the community that He has provided me with over the last 5 to 10 years are all factors that make it possible for me to be able to lead this group at this point. And lead is a very loose term, and I'll talk more about the details of that in just a minute. But if you're wanting some more encouragement as you listen to the concept of mom friendships and how to best pursue them and how to best invest in them, and you're like, this is not the stage of life I'm in, I couldn't do it exactly that way. Keep in mind, again, as I always tell you, that I might be sharing examples from my own life to give you some specific ideas. I might be sharing examples from my own life to tell you, hey, here's one scenario in which this has worked, but I am never telling you this is the only way that this will work, unless, of course, I'm talking about a principle of Scripture that is absolute truth. So the questions that I get asked all the time about mom friendships are, one, where do you find your people? Well, there's going to obviously be a myriad of replies possible to this, but one of the best places to find mom friends is the places that you already go. I know that sounds so basic and I know it sounds so obvious, but I do feel like I get enough DMs about this where people are like, okay, kind of almost like a dating mindset, like where are the best kind of hunting grounds for friendship? Just like people talk about where's the best place to go to meet your future mate. So if you are already invested in your church, absolutely look for friendships there. If you are deeply involved in your homeschool co-op, look for friendships there. If you are volunteering at your child's school already, look for somebody else that's volunteering that doesn't necessarily even have the same personality or stage of life, but that you can connect with and that you can form a bond with. Again, do you need me to tell you this? Perhaps not. And many of you don't. But I feel like I've made some of these suggestions and people have come back and said, you know what? It didn't even occur to me to look around me. I was thinking that the situation that I was in was not good for friendship. So I was looking outside of myself and looking outside of my circumstances. And so the first place we should start should be where the Lord already has us. Some of my deepest friendships now were formed while grading like a madwoman at our homeschool co-op 6 years ago. So my very dear friend, mentor mom, Jennifer Flanders, has 12 kids. I've talked about her before and how she has 12 kids. Her youngest 3 are the same age as my oldest 3. So that's where we overlap. She's about 15, 17 years my senior. She is such a source of wisdom and encouragement in my life. And I would not have as deep of a friendship with her as I do if it weren't for the fact that we sat at the same table and graded as fast as we could go. She was grading algebra and English, and I was grading Spanish. And then on some off periods, she found out that I had an English degree, and so she asked me to help grade her English papers for her because that's a really involved process. So as we spent week after week, year after year at this homeschool co-op, grading like crazy, but also slipping in little bits of conversation here and there, taking 5 minutes break and talking, but mostly trying to get as much as we could done while we were at the co-op because we didn't want to take this, quote unquote homework to the house with us afterwards and have it be hanging over our heads for the week. So we were trying to get our stuff done. So you wouldn't think that that would really be a great place to cultivate a friendship, because how are you going to have time to have a deep conversation? How are you going to have time to really see someone's character or personality when you're so focused on this one particular goal? But I think the very fact that both of us were focused on that goal, that we both very strongly felt that this grading time was set aside just for that and that we wanted to be diligent to get that done, was an indication that we had some similar personality traits that could overlap well and that could be a bond that we could form, that we were both kind of very self-driven that way. And then we found all kinds of other similarities through the years. We both love to write. We both love to work with our hands. We both love investing in our families. We both love finding good thrifting deals. We are both somewhat artistic in various ways, and we love to use words. We've both written blogs. We have both had speaking opportunities because of the things that we've written. So there's actually a ton of life overlap that I wouldn't have known anything about if I had just assumed that this woman that was not in the same age range as I was, that mostly didn't have kids the same age as mine were, and that was obviously very busy as she sat there diligently doing her work. And I felt the same way. I might have missed an opportunity to be her friend if I had made all these assumptions about her. Instead, that friendship gradually grew and has deepened over time until I consider her one of my very dearest friends. So I give you that example that's very literal. Like, I found a friend exactly where I was physically sitting at the table. And we started to gravitate towards the same table because we enjoyed those little bits and pieces of conversation that we could fit in between the cracks of grading. So that's one good example. Another good example, again, just giving you some food for thought, some ideas that you might not have considered, or maybe just pushing you to actually act on some things that you've considered but aren't sure whether it's going to quote unquote work. Another great place that I have fostered some really deep friendships is at the gyms where I've taught fitness classes for the last 16 years. My best friend, Lindsay, who does the illustrations in my books and is my best friend and business partner, that came about because we spent so much time walking the trails near our gym with our kids in childcare, because the gym was fine as long as they had our cell phone numbers and we were within the vicinity on these trails that were kind of right around our gym that we could walk. And I would usually have a baby strapped to my chest or be pushing somebody or several somebodies in a stroller, and we would just go off on these trails and talk for an hour until our childcare time was up. And I really feel like gyms are a kind of little used resource for moms, because while yes, you have to pay a monthly fee, there are very few other institutions for which that monthly fee includes childcare, or at least the childcare is a very minimal add-on in terms of money. And so having that where you can go meet a friend and do a workout class together, or walk a trail, or walk a track, or run on the treadmill beside each other, or just sit in kind of the foyer and chat. A lot of times they even have coffee. I'm not a coffee girl, but if you're a coffee girl, a lot of gyms provide that kind of thing, or have a smoothie bar. I think they are a great resource for modern moms, and I have found so much rejuvenation and enjoyment and opportunity to connect with friends there that I wouldn't have had otherwise if they didn't have the childcare available. Another question that I get asked, beyond where do you find people that you can connect with, is how do you know if this person is going to be a longtime best friend type of girl? And I feel like that is putting a lot of pressure on any given relationship, whether it is in search of a best friend or in search of a kindred spirit or in search of just someone to hang out with or in search of friends for your children to play with, we have to have a reasonable expectation of those relationships. So there are going to be different levels of intimacy within every friend relationship. And just like it took years for me to cultivate that deep level of intimacy with my friend Jennifer and with my friend Lindsay, it literally involved years of talking through and beginning to understand and pray for each other, of helping each other through hard situations, of being sources of practical advice. And you don't get that in your first 2 or 3 meetings. Or even 4 or 5. So if you are looking for an instant connection, again, it's almost parallel to the dating idea of, oh, I need to find the one. There needs to be a spark. My heart needs to leap when I meet this friend. And then I'll know she's the one. I'll know she's the one that's going to be there for me when my kids are puking and when I'm postpartum and struggling with anxiety. And just coming into relationships with huge expectations often is what smothers the friendship before it ever really gets going. So I feel like praying, Lord, give me eyes to see how I can be a blessing to others and the people whom you would have me invest in, and the level to which you would have me invest in their lives is so key. I should have started out this whole podcast by saying, if you are looking for godly friendships, you need to start by praying for them. I actually prayed for the kind of friendships that I am currently able to invest in and enjoy and have poured into my life for a good decade before I really felt like I was in a place of ease and comfort and peace in relationship rather than kind of tension and strife, because I've had those relationships as well. So praying that the Lord would open your eyes to the people that he would have you bless, instead of simply looking at it as a situation where you are getting all of the benefit. Lord, how can I be a blessing to others today? Whom would you have me befriend? Maybe someone that's on the fringes, maybe someone that's been overlooked, that you might want to pass over yourself because they don't look like they would offer you a lot. May we instead turn it around and say, how can I pour into others? So often when we take the focus off of ourselves and our needs and who will mesh well with our personality, we start to have the eyes of Christ. And you notice that he is looking for the people that others might not notice. He's looking for scenarios that may seem unlikely to produce fruit, and yet they end up being the biggest harvest you could imagine in terms of kindred spirits. So being open to the fact that not every relationship is going to maybe hit it off perfectly right from the start, maybe isn't going to be a bosom buddy in the long run, but can be an opportunity for godly sharpening, for godly edification, for someone to pray for you and you to pray for them that day. I literally have relationships that started out great and then our circumstances changed so that we weren't able to see as much of each other. And I still am able to say that the contact that we did have was useful, that it was fruitful, that it was God ordained, and be grateful for that instead of just moaning about the fact that it didn't go as far as I wanted it to. That one didn't end up being, quote, the one. Now, I will say that I do have someone that I consider my best friend now. It's Lindsay, that I've talked about several times, because she's the person that knows me best. She's the person that I'm going to choose to invest the most time in if I have several options, because our relationship is both a business and a personal one. And it's more like a sisterhood at this point than simply a friendship. But I haven't had that for many years. And it's not something that we are guaranteed or promised in Scripture at all. It does say in the Bible that there is a friend that sticks closer than a brother, and greater love has no man than this, that he would lay down his life for his friend. And that's a very specific type of friendship. And that's going to take a lot of years of investment, just like I talked about before. But just being open-handed and saying, Lord, what do you have for me? Help me not to get too attached. Help me to be willing to invest, even if they never invest back. Help me to have your eyes in seeing the person that needs me to befriend them, rather than focusing simply on being included in the clique, being included in the popular girls group. I hear a lot of people that feel like they are being rejected by the people in their church or their co-op or their mom community or at their gym that seem to be the most popular, that seem to draw the most attention. And I'm just going to tell you that's not where our focus should be as Christians. We shouldn't be looking to be assimilated into the crowd that draws the most eyes, but instead we should be looking for whom the Lord has for us to bless and be blessed by in return. I feel like another big thing, I've had some questions about like, how do I make friendships if my neighborhood is mostly elderly people? How do I truly invest if everyone around me is homeschooled and I only have kids in public school? How do I find someone that will understand me when I have an only child and they have so many? How could we possibly connect? I think we need to be honest about the fact that our bedrock shared human experience is that we all need Jesus, and that He is able to form bonds that seem so unlikely and yet end up being the sweetest gifts in our lives. So we need to not look at people simply as a checklist of how their priorities and their life circumstances line up with ours. However, I will say that outside of the Lord doing a miracle in someone's life, either my heart or someone else's heart to completely change us, there are relationships that aren't going to be super beneficial to us. And we need to be wise and discerning, and again, go to the Lord in prayer and say, Lord, I really like this girl. I really feel like we could get along if I tried really hard. And then you realize that you're arranging your schedule around hers. It's not working well for your family. Nothing is meshing. Nothing is clicking. And we don't need to become so attached to the idea of a relationship that we can't let it go when the Lord's so clearly asking us to. Which brings me around to that concept that I said dovetailed with the stages of life that allow you to be able to do different things, with praying for years for something to happen, with keeping your eyes open for opportunities to be a blessing. And that is this homeschool girls group that I've gotten to start called Grace Girls. And it's an idea that popped into my head as a result of a friend of mine who's about, I think, 10 years older than I am. She has 8 children, and she has several of her kids' ages that line up with mine, including a younger daughter who I think is about 8. I have 10-year-old twins. I have an 8-year-old son. So some of those ages overlap, but most of her kids at home are girls, and they are older than my girls. So again, you might not think necessarily like there's a lot of opportunity for their relationships to match up, or her relationship to match up with mine. And yet, because she was at our homeschool co-op, because she's the type of person that just is gracious and welcoming to all ages and all stages and different ages of children, she opened up her home for a Bible study briefly during the summer, 2 summers ago. And it was only a short thing right before school started, but my girls loved it so much that they asked me if we could continue doing something like that. And they had been begging me to start something called a Flower Girls Club. And Della had a whole kind of construct in her brain about how there would be a different flower theme for each month. And I told her, Della, I don't think I have the capacity for that. She said, I'll plan it, Mama, I'll plan it. But it just wasn't quite gelling. So the idea that the Lord gave me that came from my friend Tammy's example of the Bible study, where there was a wide range of girls' ages that were welcome and accepted, and they tailored the Bible study to be able to be understood by a bunch of different ages. And I love that she did that. This idea that popped into my head was, what if we met once or twice a month and there could be a rotating host? We would make a schedule and mamas could sign up to be a host for that particular day, and they would decide on the activity. They would decide on the snack, and they would have their homes ready to go for us to come over. And here's where the stages idea comes in. In the past, maybe 10 years ago, I did not know enough women who were capable of simply opening their homes and coming up with an activity and creating a schedule and providing the snacks that could say yes to this, that I would have been able to have this idea come to fruition. And yet, I recognized the Lord was like, this person and this person and this person and this person. And so I asked 3 really mature, capable, responsible, organized mamas, because I knew 3 mamas like that now, after praying for years and years for the Lord to bring people like that into my life that could be examples to me, that could be a source of friendship and stability and friends for my own kids. And He had provided that so richly, like I said, in the last 5 to 10 years, more recently in the last 3 to 4 years, honestly. And He gave me these moms' names to ask. And all 3 of them said, yes, I think that's a great idea. I think our girls would really enjoy that. So we started out with an age range of about 9 to 13. And that's evolved because as a homeschool group, we're not super concerned about the peer group being exactly the same or the age range being super close. So sometimes we have little sisters or even little brothers there if they need to come. If there's nobody at home to watch them or they're not napping, then they can come along, and there's nobody that cares even a little bit, even though the group is tailored for girls. Sometimes there's 3-year-olds there. Sometimes there's 22-year-olds there. And you know what? Everybody still has a blast. The older ones are happy to help with the younger ones or do a craft themselves. And they don't feel like this is belittling to hang out with small children because that's just not their view. Again, they're there with a view of blessing others and being blessed in return. And when we come in with our open palms and say, Lord, how can I accomplish this? How can you accomplish this through me? It's amazing how the Lord changes kind of our expectations and even our feelings to be something so much more in line with His than instead of simply supporting our own agendas. So these 3 mamas said yes. And then they asked a couple more mamas, and then they asked a couple more mamas. And before we knew it, we had about 8 to 10 mamas and their girls who were all signed up per month. So each of the mamas would say, okay, I'm going to host on November 17th, and we're going to be doing a craft. I don't know what it is yet, but I'll let you know. So we started a big group text, and basically on the week of or the week before, whoever's hosting will say, hey, I need a head count of who's coming next week. We're going to do a Christmas craft, or we're going to learn how to make this particular kind of cookie. When I've hosted, I have usually done a tea party to kick off the year. And so we don't do a particular craft. We just do a hangout and get dressed up in fancy dresses and do a tea party. And then we've done a shuffle dance tutorial. If you've ever seen me do shuffle dancing with my son Simon on my Instagram, we've done that. We've done a Christmas caroling practice, and then we've gone to a nursing home and done some caroling for them. So it can be a very wide range of activities. It doesn't just have to be crafting. Sometimes people do demonstrations of how to do something and the girls watch. There's usually a small devotional. Now, here's why. In all of my busyness, you would think, Abby, you had small babies and you were launching a book. Why in the world would this be the time that you decided to start this girls group and head this up? Because quite honestly, all I do is I facilitate the schedule. I make up the schedule and choose the days that we will be meeting. And then I send that out in a note to the whole group, and they're able to edit it and sign up for those days. And then they're responsible for the rest. The only thing I'm responsible for is getting my girls there. And we have such a helpful network of mamas that they'll even pick my girls up on a day that I can't go, or bring them home if I have somebody to drop them off that can't pick them up. We don't require the mamas to be there. The mama that's in charge understands that whoever's there to help her is there to help her. Whoever's not doesn't have to be there. So it's one of the chillest, most organic experiences of friendship, both for the mamas and for the girls, that I have ever experienced. It came together and gelled so easily, and it's continued because it's not a high stress, high maintenance, highfalutin kind of group. Everybody is very willing to be flexible. If we can't meet one day, or one week we were supposed to meet and the person that was supposed to host wasn't able to do it last minute, so we said, you know what? We're just going to go meet at a local bakery that looks really cute, that's new, that we're going to check out. And we all went to the local bakery and ate pastries and sat around, and the girls walked around outside and window shopped in the little shopping area where the bakery was. And it was such a good, sweet, low-key experience. But we were able to do it even though it wasn't, quote, according to the plan, because nobody in this group cares if everything goes perfectly according to plan. So I know I could say a lot more about godly friendship. I know I could give a lot more examples. I know I could give a lot of tenets. And again, I have an entire chapter coming up where I give more of my story with really hard relationships in the past, and also the way that the Lord has redeemed those and the lessons that He's taught me in my upcoming book, Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad. So look for that if you want some more in-depth detail. But I have so many people that want questions answered about Grace Girls, and it's really such an easy answer. I asked the mamas to join me because I felt like they were the names that the Lord gave me to ask. They helped organize it by signing up for the first several days. They invited people that they thought would be good fits. And some people have not continued with it. They've said, this doesn't work for our schedule, or we're too busy. And that's totally fine. There are no hard feelings. And then those mamas have signed up for days. They pick their activity. They prepare all of the food. There's no chipping in. We don't have any kind of money breakdown. There's no requirement for everybody to bring $10. It's just kind of an understood agreement that if you're hosting, then you provide snacks, and it's not elaborate and it's not expensive. And we make sure that we aren't a burden to each other. And if some of the mamas have never signed up to host, and that's totally fine too. There's not this responsibility by signing up for this free group that is totally come and go that you have to be a hostess. So some of us host more often than others. And I think the people that originally signed up to do it understand that kind of the responsibility for keeping it going, if we want to do that, is on us. And I've got several of those friends that I first asked that are willing to host several times throughout the year, whereas someone else might only host once. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of a way that you might organize your own. It doesn't have to be a homeschool group, but organize your own group with your girls, or organize your own group, maybe just a crafting group with other mamas. It doesn't have to be complicated. And I do think that the praying about it was what made it so clear to me that this was going to work. Whereas many other times it would not have felt like it was working and it would have felt like a burden. And I do think the praying about it showed me whom I was supposed to invite. So I hope that's an encouragement to you that while yes, friendships are hard. They can be. They sometimes are. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just easy and they fall into place and they are so obviously God ordained. And the Lord is so good to both make us work for some of them and give us challenges to overcome so that we realize that we have to rely on His strength to do that, and that ultimately He is the great friend. He is our help and companion that we are to rely on. We shouldn't ever be putting all of our hope in the one basket of this perfect friendship ideal. And yet He is so good also to provide us with those easy friendships. If you're looking for a friend still that brings refreshment to your soul, I encourage you to keep praying. I encourage you to keep hoping. I encourage you to keep reaching out. I encourage you to keep asking and inviting, even when things don't go to plan, even when it doesn't end up lasting forever, even when she isn't your bosom buddy. And I encourage you to look at friendship with the opportunity to be a blessing and to receive blessing in return, and not simply to look at it as a way to receive something or be built up only for your own gain. And I'm so glad that you guys are my friends here on this podcast and that you get to be here with me. May we all be the type of friends that we hope to attract. If you guys enjoyed today's program, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and share with others. And if you're looking for more daily content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, you can follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.